Hello and welcome to today's video. As you can tell by the title, this is kind of a wrap up on what the meta was at Worlds 2024. I've been doing this throughout the year. If you're new to the channel, I've actually been doing it for a couple of years. We look at a patch and we compare presence rates of champions and from one patch to the next. Like, for instance, Ari was buffed on 14.17 or 14.18. We saw a rise in presence, therefore we can assume that the patch was effective and that it brought the champion presence up for said champion. Nerfs Azir, nerfed on 14.17 or 14.18, and then we saw at Worlds it drop off in presence. The presence drop that I usually use is about 10% or more. In this case, we had a ton of champions that were nerfed on 14.17 or 14.18 that were taken out of, high, like, there are tiers to this thing. So, in my opinion, when I look at champion presence and I look at, champion impact, we have champions that are automatic bans. We have champions that are must picks. We have champions that are considered, meta, right? They are reasonable. We see them time and time again. We have, off meta, but they're still, on the fringe. There are picks that are like, oh, that's a counter that works in this situation. And then we have champions that are just outright, random picks. Nunu, for instance, picked by FlyQuest. I don't think anybody in their right mind actually expected that to hit pro play, but in part that helped them, right? That gave them an opportunity. So we're looking at this, and in the case of the Worlds patch, it was very effective. The meta did change. The presence did change. We saw 8 of the 10 most presence champions change. Some people disagree with my usage of presence. They believe it should be pick rate, but in my opinion, like I said, the tiers of things, if a champion is banned, that means it's even more OP than what you're seeing on the Rift. So this notion that, hey, this champion I see on the Rift is a real problem, it could be a problem, but the bigger problem is actually what's so much better than it that it must ban, and then what you don't like is being filtered into the draft. So, over here we have 14-16. That was the last patch in the 4 major regions. There was 84 games played. There is a possibility that it was not all 4 major regions. It might be just LCK, LPL, some variation of the LCK, LPL, LEC, LCS. And then the World's patch outright, including all games, including minor regions. So, buffs, Ari, no picks on 14-16. So nobody even had Ari in the draft at all on 14-16 in the 4 major regions. But we saw it in draft 36% of the time. At Worlds, we saw it in the finals. So 1 out of every 3 games, that's a big difference, right? We went from nowhere to be found to 1 out of every 3 games. Gnar and Jax in the top lane. Gnar was 12% presence. So what, 1 of every 8 games we saw it? Maybe once a day? Once every 2 days? Jax 37%, so 1 of every 3 games. But then Gnar went up to 61%, so 3 out of every 5 games. Jax 79%, 4 out of every 5 games. Very common picks at Worlds, in part due to what they allow. I mean, Gnar is a safe blind, it is Worlds, but it was buffed, and that gave teams a better opportunity to use it. Maybe that's why Renekton really fell out of meta, right? It's another comfort pick for a lot of these players. Now, nerfs. There are like a dozen champions on here that were nerfed that just left the meta to some degree. In the case of Azir, 78% pick rate on 14-16 to 0. 0. It did not even get banned at Worlds. Nobody even thought, hey, we should ban this. That's how bad it was. That's how nerfed it was, I guess. Corki, 73% to 1% banned. Somebody tried to ban it in 106 games at Worlds. Otherwise, Corki completely taken out of the meta. So I would say Riot effectively took that whole issue, Azir Corki meta, out of the equation at Worlds. Ivern, 63% presence in the jungle. So 2 out of every 3 games, 3 out of every 5. Dropped to 21%, 1 out of every 5. So a big drop off there in the jungle. Leona support, 66%. So 2 out of every 3 games to 42%, 2 out of every 5. Lilia in the jungle, 81% to 3%. So Lilia essentially nerfed out of the meta. Gone. Don't have to worry about Lilia. I mean, it got picked a couple times, but really, it was no longer a champion that was viable. Maokai, 77% to 27%. This is not as much maybe about Maokai as it was about the prevalence of Sylas. So Sylas getting into the meta as the tournament went on, Maokai dropped out because Sylas washes out Maokai. So I feel like that had something to do with it. It dropped 50%. I mean, there are big changes here. We're seeing 78%, 50%. I mean, that's a big drop off in presence. It's you can feel that change in the meta just by watching the game itself and watching draft. Misfortune, 56% to 19%. So 3 out of every 4 games to 1 out of every, not 3 out of every 5 to 1 out of every 5. Nasus in mid lane, also picked in top lane, went from 57% presence to out of the meta. Goodbye, Nasus. No longer need it. It's gone. That was a fun little run, though, where we had something weird going on and was being kind of meta. It's nice. That was a change. I don't think anyone could deny that that was different than what we'd have been experiencing for the last several years. I mean, Nasus being a meta champion for even a patch is wild. Rumble, although we saw it, and I thought it would have high presence at Worlds, it did not. It still didn't end up here in the top 10, but it ended up with 53% presence, so it is what it is, but it dropped from 98 to 53%. In finals, it's going to give us a weird view on it because it was I picked in 3 of the 5 games, if I recall. So that seems high, but for the middle part of the tournament, there was not a lot of Rumble play anymore. As the carry-oriented top laners kind of dropped out of the meta, dropped out of the tournament. They didn't really have, those guys that like the Kias or the Summits of the world that you're like, okay, this is our best player. We're going to give them Rumble. Like, that didn't really happen quite as much towards the end. Senna at 80 carry, 44% to 4%. Yes, Senna was pretty meta in 14-16. It was considered quite a common pick. Half the games it was, 2 out of every 5, it was in the draft in some way, shape, or form. Smolder, 88% to 27%. Although it was picked in finals, 88 is quite high in percent, right? In 7 out of every 8 games, presence, dropped down to 27%, 1 out of every 4. I mean, it got more than cut in half. I mean, hell, it dropped significantly, 61% less presence. 80 carries, Zeri was picked in 1 out of every 4 games in terms of draft, pick or ban, and it went down to 2%. And then Ziggs, although we saw it get in, didn't drink enough coffee this morning. Ziggs went from 83% presence down to 59. Although we saw it in World's Finals quite a bit, it was not as highly touted as it was on 14-16. At World. So it did drop off in presence quite a bit. There are a lot of champions here. There was a change. We've seen the top 10 champions outright. Like 14-16 going into this tournament, it was Rumble, Smolder, Ziggs, Lilia, Azir, Maokai, Corki, Vi, Leona, K'Sante. 8 of those 10 champions no longer remained in the top 10. The only 2 that stayed were Ziggs and Vi, and they dropped down to 9th and 10th. So I would say these patches effectively changed what was going on. Some people disagree with that. They believe, in part, they're probably looking at it from a traditional sports standpoint where you don't change rules like this every 2 weeks. That, the best teams all year long, they should go into this tournament and they should be playing the same patch they played in summer. Why are they changing the patch? These aren't even the best teams that were, all year long. And it's like, okay, well, that's when championship points come into play. Like, whoever has the most championship points, you could say, these teams were the best over these 16 patches. Every 2 weeks, the rules change, so we can assume that this team is the best one on this last patch because over 16 patches, they were the most consistent. But that's the nature of the beast. Like, some people, they look at it traditional, and it's not a traditional situation. This is an esport that changes every 2 weeks. You know the rules. You know how it works. You probably play the game. You know that patches exist. That's how this game is played. So every 2 weeks, the rules do change. That's why, in my opinion, T1 are not the best team of 2024. I said it last year when T1 won. I said it the year before when DRX won. The best team on the patch wins Worlds. Not necessarily the best team all year long. You know, it rubs people the wrong way. It makes people butthurt. It doesn't take away from the fact that the team is a world champion. It's just the fact is the rules change every 2 weeks. So a team is the best on the patch. And in this case it was. We see a significant difference. At Worlds, Yone takes top spot in presence, followed by Aurora. They're nowhere to be found on here. Skarner, Ashe, Jax, Rel, Callista, Gnar. Those 8 champions are not in the top 10 of 14-16. This is a totally different patch. And that's shown here with how many champions were nerfed out of the meta altogether. It changed everything. And that's how the game's played, and I'm okay with that because I understand the rules. It's not like a traditional sport where all of a sudden, hey, you know, we're going to move the 3-point line because these teams over here, you know, they're doing really well shooting the 3, so we're going to back the 3-point line up a bit, make it so that it's harder to shoot 3s. Or, oh, we're going to watch football or soccer or whatever. We're going to actually change the size of whatever, the goalie box or whatever, or make it so that penalty kicks have to be taken 15 yards back from where they are. Like, rules being changed just because, you know, the game state is what it is and we got to make it more even and things like that. So it's different. It's not what it's not what you see on TV when you watch a traditional sport. So you have to change that mindset. So, you know, there's a big difference here. I mean, we had 2 top laners, 3 junglers. 3 mids, APC, and a support in the top 10 on 14-16. And then it goes to 3 top laners in top 10 in presence. The top lane kind of zeroing on these champions in terms of in presence. And keep in mind, Aurora is a flex, but was more often picked in top lane. That's why it's represented in red. Jungle, 2 junglers, 1 mid laner. 3 ADCs or bot lane picks. All of a sudden the bot lane becoming more prevalent. Ashe must ban or pick. Callista must ban or pick. Support, Rel, very highly picked. Although, I mean, that champion was dying a lot. It was definitely a bait pick for many. And in Game 5, it was a bait pick for BLG. So, I mean, it's undeniable in my opinion that the Worlds patch succeeded in changing the meta. It was not stale. You know, I do wonder how many champions were picked. Also, you know, somebody brought up something, and it's maybe a project that I'll do. I have a couple things I want to do this offseason, and every day there's going to be content still. Tomorrow I may start, you know, recapping the rookie seasons of, you know, each role and things like that, and then get ready for free agency, because free agency doesn't start, in my opinion, till November 17th, regardless of what rumors may be spewing all over the place. So we'll talk about that leading up to that. But there is something to be said about Fearless and trying to look at the Chinese teams and seeing if anything actually was different this year compared to last year. I do think there is an argument to be made for somebody like Knight, in particular with how many champions he played at this tournament, to maybe look to see, you know, did he play more champions than he normally does during Fearless, you know, on a game-per-game basis and things of that nature, and kind of just look at it and see if something changed. Because some people do believe that the Fearless draft being incorporated into 2025 will change things. But I do want to see the data that we saw from 2024 to verify that claim instead of how we feel. Because, you know, we can feel a certain way, but if it's not based in reality, then it's just, you know, just out of pocket. So that's it for the video. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, like it, subscribe to the channel for daily League of Legends content. Follow me on Twitter, join the Discord, become a YouTube supporter, and hope to see you again tomorrow.